So once we've had confirmation that the external power and the chocks have been removed, we're going to start the engines. The start sequence on the Airbus is very straightforward. We simply select ignition switch to ignition start. You see the engine page appears automatically on the lower ECAM screen and the air conditioning automatically shuts off. We have sufficient bleed pressure, so what I'm going to do now is select engine 2. We usually start engine 2 first because that pressurizes the yellow hydraulic system, which in turn pressurizes the parking brake. There are no call-outs necessary on the Airbus engine start, it's all done automatically. So all we do is look at the N2, which gets to about 23.5% thereabouts before the fuel is introduced. We also have increasing EGT showing successful ignition, and the N1, which is the front compressor of the engine, increasing as well. You hear that clicking there as the engine's generator comes online and begins providing us with electrical power. And next we can start engine 1. And the after start sequence means that we select the APU bleed off. The APU can go off now by deselecting the master switch. Anti-ice, not required, off. The ground crew are clear at this time, so we can select the taxi light on as well. Auto brake max for a possible rejected takeoff. Checking the status display, making sure there are no abnormalities. Trims, 0.5 nose up, and we can confirm that on the flight control page. Speed brake can be armed, and the flaps can be set to 1+F, which is our takeoff configuration today. And then we can run the after start checklist. Anti-ice, not required, off. Trims, 0.5 nose up and 0 set. Flaps, config 1+F set. ECAM status has been checked, and the ground equipment and engineer is all clear. After start checklist complete. Once we're on the move, we can check the brakes, make sure that they work. They're very, very sensitive on the FS Labs A320. I suspect that might be my configuration rather than the simulator fault, but they are. I'm finding them extremely sensitive, so they tend to stop you when you're in normal taxi speed. But just check to make sure that there is no residual pressure on the pressure gauges, which there isn't. Very short taxi out to the runway here at Bristol. So once we get to the holding point, before departing, we want to perform the flight control check. So full left aileron, full right aileron, neutral, elevator up, and down, neutral, full left rudder, full right rudder, and neutral. You can also perform the takeoff configuration test. And you can see the takeoff config normal legend showing on the ECAM memo display, and we have no blue items, so the standard call you'll hear in the Airbus is takeoff no blue, which means that all the pre-vital actions which appear in blue, if not completed, have all turned to green, and so we're configured for departure. The before takeoff checklist to the line, therefore, says flight controls have been checked, takeoff brief and config are reviewed, FMA, we have climb nav 1 FD2, 129 blue, 131 magenta, and 8000 blue to become flight level 80 at the transition of 6000. Transponder we can set to on at this stage, as we will be lining up on the runway shortly. And the ECAM takeoff memo, takeoff no blue. And that's the before takeoff checklist to the line complete. At this stage, no air traffic control online. I have expressed my intentions to line up on the runway on Unicom. You can see that there's nothing on TCAS, nothing to be shown visually on the approach either. So we can cycle the seatbelt signs to tell the cabin crew we're ready to line up. We can select the landing lights to on. Turn off lights aren't necessary at this stage. And the nose light to take off. Strobe lights can go on as well. And we'll be taking off with air conditioning off today to save fuel, to increase performance as well, so the packs are off. Predictor wind shear auto. If I move the arm of my chair here, we'll be able to select weather radar system 1 on as well. So the before takeoff checklist below the line then. TCAS is TARA. Radar on. Predictive wind shear auto. Cabin crew warned. And the packs are off. And that's the before takeoff checklist below the line complete. And so we'll line up on the runway. Now I have to say that just as a little disclaimer here before we line up, my takeoffs have been rather scrappy, the ones I've done so far, and this is because the throttle units that I have aren't really designed for the detent throttle system that we have in the Airbus. So sometimes I can end up with symmetrical thrust warnings. And it can be a little bit difficult to get the thrust levers into the correct detent. So if you do hear those warnings on the departure, do forgive me. It's not the simulation, it is just me not being able to put the thrust levers into the right detent. So for takeoff we're going to set the chrono and the elapsed timer as well. Advance the thrust levers to about 50% N1 initially to allow the engines to stabilise. And then we'll set, once they're stable, the flex or toga detent as necessary. You can see there's a little bit of swapping and changing there because my thrust levers aren't correctly set up, but we have flex 47 man, SRS runway, auto thrust blue. So the FMA enunciations are correct past 100 knots. V1 rotates gently up on the stick and following the SRS from the flight director bars. Nav. I'm going to select the landing gear up as well. Now that we have positive rate of climb. And when the lever climb enunciation appears on the FMA, we're going to reduce thrust to the climb detent, and once we're above 400 feet we can select the autopilot on, and I've selected autopilot 1, the on-side autopilot for my side. So there's the lever climb. I'm going to try gently as possible to place the thrust levers into the climb detent, and the first pack can go on after thrust reduction. So we now have thrust, climb, climb, auto thrust on the FMA. Pack 1 can go on. Once we're through the slat speed, we can retract the flaps. So flaps to 0, speed checked. And once we're cleared to a flight level, we can set standard on the altimeters, cross-check the altimeters, so we have flight level 36 now for 140 blue. And the after takeoff checklist, landing gear is up with no indications, flaps selected up and no indications on the ECAM, and the packs are on. That's the after takeoff checklist complete.